meet both in person, and I know we have a virtual group here. I am Dr. Avery Olson. I'm an associate professor in Educational Leadership Department, and I have had the pleasure of being Shannyn's chair. I had her in some courses. We really connected a lot, talked a lot about theory and research and methods and all kinds of things. And so it was wonderful to be paired with her as she did this project. So just to let you kind of know what will happen, first I'm going to have the committee members introduce themselves. And then I'm going to have Shannyn, in honor of community, which you'll see is so big for her thesis, just take a minute to tell us about her community that's come here today to show up for her. And then what I've asked Shannyn to, or we have as a committee, we've read her full thesis, and we've asked her to prepare about 30 to 35 minutes of her talk that'll kind of tell you a little bit about it. And then after that, what happens is the committee will have conversations and questions with her. You know, might be things that we need to clarify or just want to know because it's very interesting, maybe some feedback. And then we will privately have a conversation. Typically, we ask everybody to step out, but it might be easier for us to step into it. And it is nice if the community spends time with a candidate, because that's when we're also kind of deliberating the results. And then, you know, after we do our conversation, depending on timing, if there is time, we do take questions from the audience too for our candidate here. But then when we come back, we tell you all the results of today's academic exercise. But, so let me start with the committee if you all want to introduce yourselves.
Hey everyone, let's be here.
Oh, hi.
I am a faculty member in the Equity Education program here in the College of Ed, and I am very, very happy to be part of Shannyn's defense and thank you all for being here. I thought this started at 11, so I came in and I was like, where is everyone? But this is amazing to see so many people show up and show out.
Hey everybody, my name is Teresa Ambo and I'm Gabrielina Tongwa. So we're at Kelowna on Gabrielina Tongwa unceded ancestral territory. So I always think it's important to acknowledge that sort of connection to this place. And I've known Shannyn since she was a community college student. And so it's kind of really beautiful to be here and to be on the committee. I'm a faculty at UC San Diego in education studies, and I specialize in Indigenous education, Indigenous research methodologies, just kind of my contribution to this space. But it's really beautiful to see so many people here to support. I also always acknowledge my sister who's here, and she's also faculty here at SIPH.
Before I hand it over to you, also, you know, it's fine if you need to like step out or if you have to go or people come, we want to encourage them to come on in. And there are restrooms just outside on this door and then down the hall, kind of around the corner that way. All right, would you like to take a minute before we get started and tell us who's come today to support you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I know you all, but you may not know each other. So thank you for being here in person and on Zoom to support me. In the room, I have a lot of Cal State Long Beach folks. I have students here. Students, thank you for being here, as well as staff members and faculty that I've been working with, and some administrators. Shout out to our administrators in the room. Additionally, I have some folks that I met at UCLA through my undergraduate career, joining in here in person and on Zoom too. Thank you for being here. And then I'm like, who else am I missing? Just like other wonderful people that I've met throughout this journey of my own like higher education career. So yeah, I'm like, maybe it's too much to introduce you all, but that's who's in the room.
Shannyn, you want to kick us off and get started?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and yes, also my family is on Zoom, so. Alrighty. So again, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna go through it real quick, but because there's a lot of content, and as you may know, you're here for my thesis presentation, and the title is Understanding Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Students' Ways of Knowing and Belonging. And so I'll just get started. Thank you, Dr. Ongo, for already acknowledging the land we're on, but I do want to give another acknowledgement of it. As Dr. Ongo stated, we are on Pavagna, we are on Tongva, Gabrielino, Ahashman, and Waneno Nation land, and I will always acknowledge that wherever I am. And it's not just because it's historical, but because it's a continued legacy. Thank you to our students who are here and our staff and faculty who are here who continue to not only help our students on this land, but revitalize the land as well. So today, I'll be going over a lot, basically everything I've done over the past year for this project. But I'll talk about a little bit of background, statement of the problem, the purpose, my research questions, the conceptual framework that I came up with, the literature I reviewed, along with my methodologies, the participants, findings. Then we'll discuss those findings a little bit and also discuss recommendations. So first, background of me as a researcher and also why I wanted to do this research. Some of you may know, many of you may know, I am a mixed heritage individual. So I am Samoan and Mexican, and I definitely bring those identities into all of the work that I do and the research that I do. Outside of my other roles, I am a sister, a daughter, a partner, cousin, auntie, friend. I try to do all I can through those relationships. I'm also a first generation college student, and here on campus, I'm the assistant director of our Asian Pacific Islander and Disney Resource Center. And this is my family, or some pictures of my family members, and they're really the reason why I wanted to do this study. As I mentioned, I'm a first generation college student, so being the first to go, or at least one of the first to go, was important for me, but also got me thinking, like, why? Why is it that I'm the one and not like someone else in my family? So I really wanted to understand belonging, and specifically like what the institution was doing to make me feel like I belonged, and so much so that I kept going, and I'm here today in my master's program. So because of all of that, I started looking into the facts. Here are some of the facts. They're a bit disheartening, but we need to talk about them. So NHPI students make up only 0.3% of undergraduate students in the US, and in California, about 0.5 or 0.45%. And of that 0.45 in California, 10% come to the CSU. So as you can see, the numbers are small. There is extreme underrepresentation for this population, and because of that extreme underrepresentation, it leads to feelings of isolation, invisibility, and like further marginalization within the systems that we are in. Additionally, we know that higher education was structured to really benefit dominant groups and neglect underrepresented groups. NHPI students are an interesting group as well because they are under the umbrella, oftentimes in education, of AAPI or APIDA, which stands for Asian American Pacific Islander, as well as Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American. And because of this umbrella and the further nestling of this group, it leads to misrepresentation of their needs. So there's a problem. This is the problem. This is the problem statement. In classrooms, academic context, and categorization mechanisms, NHPI students are continuously displaced. Specifically here at the CSU, we have only recently started dedicating specific supports to the AAPI or APIDA population, which is the larger umbrella. Because of how long it's taken to provide those larger supports, through my study, I kind of say that because of how long it's taken, I doubt that we'll see any specific supports for a population that's within that larger umbrella anytime soon. And because of this problem, I started to do this research. So the purpose of this research is really to investigate the experiences of belonging felt by NHPI undergraduate students within the CSU, but more specifically here at Cal State Long Beach. And so these are the three research questions that I prioritized through my study. The first is, what institutional factors influence NHPI college student sense of belonging? What curricular and co-curricular factors and experiences influence the belonging felt by NHPI students? And how do NHPI students describe their interactions with institutional agents? So before I started really doing any of the data collection, I came up with this conceptual framework. The framework uses three other frameworks that I will talk about now, but as you can see, I use them kind of interconnected. And when I was investigating this problem, I really leaned on all three of them in an interconnected way, not just focusing on one. So I'll briefly describe these. Terrell Strayhorn defines college student sense of belonging as students perceive social support, feeling that connectedness or sensation of connectedness, as well as experiencing mattering, being respected, valued, accepted within the campus community. And I really appreciate this definition because it places the responsibility of belonging on the institution. So it's our job as an institution to make students feel like they belong, not the student's job. And so that's why I really appreciated this framework. I also used a critical approach, specifically tribal critical race theory. This really helped me interrogate like the systems and the institution. I appreciate this framework because it centers Indigenous people within these institutions, and most of the time frameworks do not. And there are 9 tenets to this framework. However, the 2 that I leaned heavily on was colonization is endemic to society, and educational policies towards Indigenous peoples are linked to the problematic goal of assimilation. This framework was created first for Native American and American Indian students and like kind of looking at the issues that they face within education. But through the wording, it's expanded to Indigenous people. Many Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students identify as Indigenous to the Pacific, and they also have faced similar experiences like colonization and extreme underrepresentation within education systems. And the last framework that I used was Community Culture Wealth by Terioso. So this really allowed me to view the student through an asset-based lens and focusing more on the things they bring versus the things that they lack. And if you're unfamiliar with this model, it has six forms of wealth. First, aspirational, so hopes, dreams, motivations. Familial, your family and how you lean on them to support you. Navigational, how you navigate systems to find the support you need. Linguistic, the other languages you speak or dialects. Social, the networks that you lean on for support. And lastly, resistant, so resisting the oppression that we're often faced with within these institutions. So as mentioned, I use this framework to look at everything that I was doing, not only the questions I was asking students, but when I was interpreting the responses that they gave as well. And then when I reviewed the literature, I kind of used these to really tease out what the literature was missing. And so now I'll talk about that literature a little bit. First, I wanted to understand the experiences of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students in higher education. And I found some interesting statistics. In California, NHPI students, or the population, has the lowest bachelor's attainment degree at 22% for individuals aged 25 to 64. And another interesting statistic was in the year 2021 to 2022, only 33% of NHPI high school students were supported to complete their age requirements. So if you don't know what those requirements are, those are the ones that qualify students to apply to the CSU or the UC. So much less than half were supported to complete those requirements. And then here within the CSU, the NHPI population has like average persistence and completion rates. And lastly, it was really important for me to look into the historical context of this population because there is history with colonization on the islands of the Pacific Ocean and what that colonization did to push out traditional ways of knowledge and schooling, and now it's more like Eurocentric based because of that colonization. So through this section in my research, I kind of highlight how the effects and impacts of the historical context have followed NHPI students into the classrooms today. Through the literature, I also looked at curricular and co-curricular factors of sense of belonging. So there's research that talks about instructor behaviors in classroom environments and how those can positively affect student sense of belonging. I also looked at institutional mechanisms of belonging, specifically things like anapesigrams or different things that the institution can do or apply to fund programs, peer mentorships, things like that. So that is what I consider institutional mechanisms of belonging. And then the research also showed that student-led efforts, so for example, student organizations and different things like that, how that led to increased feelings of belonging for students. Lastly, I looked into the role of institutional agents and what positively affected students' levels of belonging. So institutional agents who were able to have relationships that empower students, that provide social capital and foster success, led to higher feelings of belonging for students. And I also looked into emerging contexts. There was one article, and I don't remember if you wrote it, Teresa, or someone wrote it. Someone that I know wrote it. There was only one article that really highlighted the role of the NHPI or Indigenous staff or faculty member. Or maybe it was you, Senna, that wrote it. But I bring up emerging context because there's not really a lot that we can draw from that's like pulling on like the importance of relationships. But I know that it's coming because I know there's people becoming doctors and becoming, masters who are writing the research. So yes, that was important for me to note in the literature as well. Now let's talk about my methods, my favorite part. So it's my favorite part because I did it differently than what people normally do. So I tried my best to use a decolonial methodology in ways that I could. So the first example is that I did a case study here at Cal State Long Beach. The reason why that's decolonial is because usually we hide the names of the institutions that we are studying at. But through the encouragement of my committee, I didn't hide that. We feared that hiding that would further nestle the NHPI population under all these things that they're already hidden under. So here at Cal State Long Beach, we enroll 39,000-ish students, and 0.22% are NHPI identified. And it's also important to note that this campus and the community of Long Beach is a historical and a currently growing NHPI population. So we're situated in a city where students know that their community is out there. Next, this is what I actually did for my study. So I had 2 Talanoa sessions. Talanoa is the NHPI traditional form of talk story. So in these 2 sessions, I had kind of like open, not very structured dialogue with students. I did have questions for them, but kind of like let them get out whatever they wanted to get out. It was pretty funny. But they did give me a lot of good content. So for the first session, I held it with our student organization, the Pacific Islanders Association, or PIA for short, at their general body meeting. There were 20 students present. We had our dialogue, and then I also asked them to write a letter of gratitude to someone who has helped them along their college journey. So they could address this to a staff, faculty, peer, family member, anyone. It's just a letter of gratitude for someone helping them along their college journey. For the second Talanoa, we had 10 students present. It was a bit more intimate discussion. We had, again, open dialogue. And then the creative activity I had them do was to draw out their idea of classroom design. So as mentioned during the first Talanoa, the kind of decolonial way that I approached this was anybody who was there could participate. They didn't have to, but it was very open. Instead of like having these rigid requirements of you have to make this, and this to participate in the study, it was open. Of course, I got their permission and things like that, but I think that this open format really allowed the students to be themselves and tell me what they truly wanted to tell me. And as mentioned, I had 20 participants in that session. And then in the second session, I did collect demographic data with the 10 students. So this is their race and ethnicity background. So there was 2 Samoan students, 2 Tongan students, and then 1 of each of the other ethnicities listed. And then I also asked them how many semesters they had spent here at Cal State Long Beach because I wanted to get a gauge of like where they were in their belonging. So if they'd only been here for 1 semester, maybe they're still getting accustomed to things versus the students who've been here for like 7 semesters. So that's a study I did, and now these are the findings from that study. I found 5 themes or 5 findings. as listed here. So one of the major themes was classroom and curriculum intentionality, faculty and staff influence, cultural engagement and identity, and institutional impacts. And the fifth theme was really central to all of them across the board. I've seen this theme in every single other theme, which was connection and recognition. And I'll talk about the centrality of that in a little bit. But next, I'll talk about what the students were saying. So first, classroom design. Students were letting me know that most of Cal State Long Beach classrooms do not meet their optimal learning environments. And this is because they are set up in individual desks most of the time, desks that don't fit their bodies. So they really were hoping to see more of communal learning formats through their drawings and through the things that they were telling me. That's what they let me know. Something that came up that I didn't expect was their desire for basic needs resources in their classrooms, and how they described the lack of those resources in and around the classrooms. Lastly, they talked about the visual representation that they wanted to see in their classrooms, not only of their cultural communities, but other identities they had. And I will show you two of the classroom designs that students drew out. So, so first, I don't know if you can see what this says, but it says filtered water. So this was what was most shocking to me, was their real desire for basic needs. But then I started thinking about the campus that we're on, and it made sense. So first I'll highlight the basic needs that students showed, which is filtered water, a snack station. There's a huge window. They also highlighted windows up here. So I thought that was interesting. Again, students also desired communal learning format. So they wanted to be in a group. They didn't want to be on their own. So here's a quote. It was just conversation that I recorded when they were drawing. Someone asked, do you guys like a better individual seat or group tables? And immediately you can hear people on the recording like tables, like instantly, that's what they wanted. So I have more drawings, but these are the two I wanted to highlight. Two different ways to think of group tables, as you can see. This one is more of like a round community format. And then lastly, like the visual representation of their communities. This is a Hawaiian flag, and this is the LGBTQ+ flag. So those are some of my findings around curriculum design. Students also talked about, those were the findings on classroom design. These are the findings on curriculum content. So students discussed how they were greatly affected by their curriculum. They felt like they belonged when they were engaged with curriculum that allowed them to engage with themselves and their identities. Additionally, they expressed the desire for wanting more curriculum that is able to engage their identities, and specifically their cultural identities. So here are a few, here's one quote that I will read. So it says, I think the curriculum matters. I know we have electives like Asian American Studies, but I feel like it'd be nice to have Pacific Islander Studies, so we feel included. If I was to read a story about someone who looks like me, I'd feel more intrigued and just more connected overall. Next, my findings on faculty and staff influence were students really highlighting staff and faculty who went beyond their academic needs. Specifically, not only checking in with them on their assignments, but how they're doing like health-wise, or just like basic needs, like did you eat today? One of the students said. And I think to me that really exemplified like familial care. Next, students were grateful for holistic support, not only focusing on the academics. And so these are excerpts from the written letters that students were expressing. One of them says, thank you for your guidance throughout my time here at CCOB. I appreciate all of the conversations we've had, from our venting to sharing little wins. Your hard work and guidance does not go unnoticed. So this was written to a staff member that a student has built a connection with over the few years that they've been here at CCOB. And as you notice, there's nothing about really academics, but those conversations went beyond that for that student. Next, this was also written to a staff member. It reads, everything has changed for the better since you got here. Love you like family. So this student, that's all they wrote, and they addressed it to a staff member who's newer to the campus and has been able to engage them with familial care. Next, the students had a lot to say about their professors. But I'm highlighting the professors that were able to positively engage them. So the professors who had a huge impact were those that really took a proactive approach, not the ones that really initiated that connection, the ones that noticed them when they walk in the room, say hello, say their name correctly, things of that nature. When professors were able to do this, students were able to create meaningful connections with them and feel more valued as a person on this campus. So here's a quote. It says, "This professor made me want to go to class. Like the moment I walked in and she asked if I was Pacific Islander, and I was like, yeah, I am. So we connected automatically on the first day. Then I missed class because I just didn't want to wake up early. And then she emailed me like that same day and she was like, hey, are you okay? If you need anything, I'm always here. She was just reaching out. So I was just like, I'm going to keep going to class. It matters when somebody notices that you're not there. So as you can see, it's not just about the automatic connection, but it's about that follow-up as well and that support that's proactive, connecting with students and recognizing their needs as they continue. So the next piece was the cultural engagement and identity, and specifically culturally affirming campus communities. So on campus, the students highlighted one community for them that they felt affirmed in, and it was their student organization, the Pacific Islanders Association, or PIA for short. When students discussed their identities, culture was extremely salient. Students also talked about how their experiences were affirmed when they were in this space, and how they actually have a desire for more spaces like this, not just this standalone one. So here are two quotes that talk about this one. This one is from the letter that they wrote. It says, CSULB PIA Club contributes to positive experiences for students. Thank you to the members of the PIA Club for making me feel welcomed on the CSULB campus. And this was a dialogue that we were having. It says, oh, and just so you know, this was a transfer student. So this transfer student came in from a campus that had multiple supports where they felt affirmed. And they talk about how they don't feel that here. And it says, I know what it's like to have a campus that makes you feel seen and heard and realize your concerns are valid and attempt to give you something that resembles that. Over here at Long Beach, you know, despite the larger campus, despite the fact that it's a CSU, I feel like there's a little more opportunity. And I think the student is talking about a little bit more opportunity to create these culturally affirming spaces for students. Next, as I mentioned, cultural identity was very salient for the students. They actually shared how they were able, well, they naturally link their cultural identities to things that are happening here on campus. For example, any shared community space they're in, they're thinking about their culture. In their classroom experiences, they're thinking about their culture, and in their motivations and milestones that they're reaching or they're attempting to reach on campus, they're thinking about their cultural identity. And so here are three quotes. The first says, it is really refreshing to be able to just come in here, eat, relax, you know, honor my culture, because our culture isn't one that's widely known. So that was a discussion within the PIA general body meeting. So that's how they feel about their group space. Second one says, when I go to class, I don't really feel like I'm a part of that community. I kind of feel like an outsider just because of the material that we learn in space around certain identities and ethnicities. Lastly, we do have our cultural graduations. It's so important not only for us, but for our family that's what we do it for. It's so important for us and for our families to see us succeed and have this milestone and walking across the stage. So I bring these up because cultural identity is so in sync with everything that the students do. I also feel like they kind of expect us to know that about them, but usually we don't. Lastly, I really looked at the institutional impacts. And when talking about the institutional practices as a whole, students actually described feeling objectified by these practices. The students voice feeling like numbers. They feel like they're just used for money, and they also feel voiceless. I think that many of these feelings stem from the students not feeling connected to the institution as a whole. And we see that through the quotes as well. And we also see through the quote that they are not receiving the recognition that they desire. So first, I feel like we're nothing but a number. Second, they were talking about upgrading the USU and upping our tuition, and it's not even going to be done until 2028. So majority of us that are here are the ones paying off all of this. I'm broke. So they feel like we're just using them for money, especially since they won't be reaping the benefits of these resources. Lastly, we petition, you say that we have a voice, and then you say, no, we're able to do all these things, you know, we're free to do X, Y, and Z, but then when we do take action, nothing. It's like it's all done for nothing. So the students in that sense feel voiceless. And lastly, for institutional impact, students really perceived institutional actions as performative. Specifically, they highlight funding disparities for their club, and they also were like kind of reconciling with the fact that Long Beach and the residing communities do have a lot of NHPI communities. They kind of felt that should be like a reason why they should get funding. So you'll see in the next quotes that they kind of use that as a reason why there should be more intentional actions instead of performative actions. So first it reads, we're such a small community, but in Long Beach, like we have a bigger NHPI community. And so it really kind of pushed my buttons when I found out that we didn't get a lot of funding. This is the one thing that brings us joy, that brings us together. It's just performative. Next, they do a lot of stuff saying, you know, we'd like to represent such and such communities, but then they don't really do anything for them. I mean, what's the point of giving me a grant, but then I also have to go and pay to use the building on campus? It's like at the end, the money's going back to you. So why does it even matter how much you're actually giving me? At that point, you're just kind of playing pretend, right? So those were all of the findings, and at least for me, when I was kind of making meaning and understanding all of these things, there's one thing that I've seen in common throughout was students' desire for connection and recognition. And although this is not the only thing that came from these findings, it is something that I would like to highlight because I've seen it in all areas. So if you remember in the classroom, students wanted a format where they can connect with each other. And they also wanted us to recognize their basic needs within the classroom. Through the curriculum, they wanted something that could connect to their identities, and they also wanted their histories and their stories to be recognized throughout curriculum as well. Faculty and staff who made a positive impact on their sense of belonging were those that were able to connect with them and continue that follow-up support and recognize their needs throughout their relationship. And then the green one, institutional impacts, it was kind of like the lack thereof connection and recognition that students really voiced throughout the study. And the blue one, throughout my time, I'm kind of realizing that that's really what the students are bringing to us is their cultural engagement and identity and how they want us to kind of take that as a way to connect and recognize them. So now that we've talked about the findings a little bit, I'll discuss kind of what the answers were, the major findings, how that aligns with the previous research, and what these findings add to the discourse. So my first research question was, what institutional factors influence NHPI college students' sense of belonging? I found out that almost all the factors influence them. It's very multifaceted. Specific institutional practices that cause these feelings were objectification, and institutional actions were often viewed as performative. Previous research actually aligns with this. In society, there is a lot of objectification of NHPI bodies through hyper-militarization and the push towards sports and performing arts. Also, NHPI experiences, we know through researches, can often be invisible under the larger umbrella that they are under. My research adds to the discourse because now we know that low levels of belonging can lead to these things. So if we don't want to boast that we're objectifying our students, maybe we should go to the root of it and make our students feel like they belong. The next question I asked was, what curricular and co-curricular factors and experiences influence the belonging of NHPI students? So first, in the classrooms, again, students would like to prioritize their connection and basic needs resources. Within the curriculum, they would like to be engaged, or they would like their multiple identities to be engaged. and specifically seeing their culture reflected in the curriculum adds to that belonging. And lastly, the culturally affirming campus community of PIA was the place where they felt that connection most. Previous research aligns with this. We know that cohorts and learning communities and those models and things like that work. We also know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs that your basic needs need to be met first before you can feel like you belong, before you can self-actualize, etc. And also we know that for minoritized populations, that cultural representation within the classroom and curriculum is important. Specifically for my findings, this adds to the discourse and enhances, or belonging is enhanced when students are able to act on their inherent forms of cultural wealth. And the last question was, how do NHPI students describe their interactions with institutional agents? So again, we had mixed reviews about our institutional agents, but the positive interactions really highlighted faculty who were able to go beyond the academics with our students and provide them with holistic support through a proactive approach. And then the negative interactions were opposite of that. The professors that don't even look up when you walk in the classroom, or don't recognize their needs as students. And previous research does align with this. Multiple positive interactions with institutional agents, such as faculty and staff, can be vital to students' sense of belonging. And then this adds to the growing body of literature that emphasizes the importance of genuine connections for minoritized populations. And so because of all of these findings, I really tried to come up with recommendations that came straight from the data, straight from the student voice. First, these are recommendations for policy. Policy is a big word, but in reality, I believe for all policymakers, in the offices we're in, the spaces we're in, we can lay down foundations for policy, whether it's really formal or informal. So the first one is to connect and recognize. I think as you can see, that was throughout the entire study. NHPI students wanted to be connected with. They wanted you to know their names and say hello. And they also wanted you to recognize them outside of that larger label that they're placed in. Next, I'm asking that policymakers prioritize in-class student needs, which are basic needs, technological needs, as well as representation. Students also called for NHPI-centered curriculum and curriculum inclusion. Next, I think it would be good for policymakers to encourage professional development around relationships and cultural competency. As another recommendation is to acknowledge, award, and compensate faculty and staff who are already doing this kind of work. And then funding cultural engagement opportunities for culturally affirming communities like the student organization mentioned, disaggregating the data from the larger AAPI or APIA label, and then lastly, acknowledging the local landscape, whether it's here or at another institution. And here are the recommendations for practitioners. So first, again, connect and recognize. And I didn't really talk too much about it previously, but connecting could be in person, it could be following them on Instagram, attending their events, connecting with the NHPI staff or faculty that you may know. It's broad, but I think we can all do it right now. And as well as recognize, offering holistic support, and proactively engaging with students. Next is incorporating NHPI elements into your classrooms, offices, or curriculum. So this can be a picture or an art piece that you buy from the NHPI artist. You can play music by NHPI artists. Our students will recognize things, see themselves, and be able to kind of engage with you a bit more easily when they see themselves represented in your spaces. Professors were asking that you encourage NHPI students to engage with their culture through their classwork and be a bridge for students to connect with their local NHPI community. We also asked for all people to be advocates for NHPI students, and then create campus-wide events and initiatives that bring visibility to the NHPI community. And lastly, working closely with the community that already exists here. And so for future research, folks that would like to look more into this, because there was so much to look into, I'm glad that I did that, but maybe in the future I can focus just on one and really dive deeply into one, or someone else can. Also, I think a longitudinal approach would be good, so we can see how belonging levels change over time. Lastly, I didn't concentrate on any other identities besides their cultural and HPI identity. So I think it would be good to consider the intersectionalities that our students have as well. Another interesting thing would be a comparative analysis, looking at other campuses with higher NHPI populations, or even campuses with lower NHPI populations too, to see how those are related. And lastly, I think it would be wonderful to engage the students in this type of work, so they can not only like learn and see the things that are happening, but also come up with solutions on their own through something like participatory action research. And lastly, I would always encourage a decolonial approach to anything we do with this population, because it is, again, so marginalized and under those larger umbrellas that we place on them as higher education institutions. And that is it.
Woo!
Just get your water. All right. So at this time, we're gonna have some questions for Shannyn and chat. I'll take a lot of notes too, and we have notes as well. But first, I just want to congratulate you for what you've done in writing your thesis, collecting this data, really honoring your students, the participants. I think we're all really proud of you. Our proposal meetings after the student writes the first 3 chapters are just a closed meeting. And I think that what was really great about that was all of what you see today, we would see pieces, threads of that, of where Shannyn wanted to go. But sometimes I think in these academic environments, you can be constrained on what research methods are or how you talk with students. And your use of critical theories and the decolonized methods in this, I think, like there was a wonderful discussion. I love this committee too, by the way. And you really embraced a lot of kind of go do what you want and we've got you. And just seeing you do this and really grow as a researcher and a scholar and a practitioner is really amazing. So I'm very proud of you. So, I just had a question for you thinking about this right now, and then I'll have your committee ask questions because I know I've been with you in the document the most. But I'm watching all of this and knowing how hard it can be, as these scholar practitioner researchers, especially when you identify with groups, because you are one of those institutional agents too. But the beauty of that now is like you have the power to do things. So when you did all of this work and put all of this together, I know you probably want to take a nap. But what is something that you walked away with? Sometimes when we work with our students, they think, hey, when I become the dean, I'll be able to change. Or when I become the president, I'll be able to make a change. And you all will when you do those things, because I know you will. But in your role right now, what's something that you walked away with that you thought, in my sphere of influence, what's something that could promote like inclusion and belonging for these students, like a practice that you could do?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Wilson. I think, again, the thing that was the most shocking to me was their need for basic needs, and meeting those things first. So at least for me, at any event or anything, like having food for students or drinks and stuff like that, to bring them in. So for example, one of the first things that I've been doing is trying to buy food and snacks for all of our cultural organizations that come to me for advising, and taking them to their spaces, not only to provide them with a small little snack of basic needs, but to build community with them in that way. So first, that's that one, but also you mentioned inclusion. So at least in my role, I've been trying to speak to all of the different communities that I help serve through my role, which are Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi communities. So when I can, naming all of those different communities and the differences. Even in like the naming of our center, we put like commas in between the communities and ands because they are different. And also like calling folks in conversations when they do use the larger labels, like, hey, what about this subset of communities? So yeah, those are like the practices that I've been doing so far. There are other practices that I'm working on, and I'm looking at Dr. Barbara Kim back there because we're working on things together to hopefully bring more curriculum inclusion here at CSULB. But it just like needs really time to do it.
That's great, thank you. And I think there's other students and practitioners in the room, and so sometimes when you see that research, it's good to think like, I can walk back right now, pick up some granola bars, and then maybe eventually you can figure out ways that the practitioners can find like just funds for regularly giving basic needs to their students in cultural centers or classrooms. And I've learned that from you as a guest lecturer in my class too. So I've seen you do that. I want to hand it over to the committee for questions and comments you may have. Who wants to get us started?
Okay, I'll go. I just want to really applaud you on that job well done. Like Dr. Olson was saying, like I'm very proud of the product of what you produced, putting this thesis together. For me, it was really, it really moved me to see like the incorporation of stories that you didn't have in the proposal. And so, you know, after the proposal, when I go into the final product of the thesis or dissertation, I usually just go straight to the findings. But when I opened up the document and I saw you incorporate the story of your granny, I like put both documents together and kind of tracked where you made changes, and you incorporated so many of the recommendations that we made in the proposal defense. It was really beautiful, like even the inclusion of quotes, and so I'm just really proud of the work you've done as a person, you know, as a Samoan woman and as a scholar, I would say. So you're very proud of yourself, and those touches were just like so deeply personal, and I think that in that way it was a decolonial work from the beginning to the end. It wasn't just lip service. You didn't accessorize your study and say it was decolonial through the method. It was really like a full body. So I really applaud you. My favorites, I mean, besides the story about your granny, my favorite story was the quote of the student talking about the desks, like how like our bodies physically don't fit within these desks, and it reminded me of Sepa I know one time giving a lecture at UCLA, and he said, "You want to see institutional racism? Try to sit at one of these desks," and it's very true. And so that was, and then the story that you put of the student who said, their favorite assignment was when they got to write about a comedian. They wrote about a Samoan comedian. So that was really beautiful. Your incorporation of the letters and then the drawings as well. And I think it was really brave of you to de-anonymize the institution. You know, it's hard to work within an institution and then study it at the same time. That's something that I do in my work. And I think we'll constantly grapple with, like, you know, is this the right thing? But the point is to transform the institutions for the better. So it kind of like leads into your question a little bit. But I'm curious on, like, with the work that you're doing, like, how do you hope to see, not just like what can you do within your sphere of influence, but what are you going to do with this, right? Like, you've done a really beautiful thesis, it honors the voices of the students here at this institution, but you're also looking at these institutional layers that need like structural change. And so maybe not even what are you going to do with this, but like what institutional change are you hoping to see from this?
No, thank you, and thank you for your the way how you described how my document is like trying to be decolonial the whole way, because that's something you can't see from the presentation. Is all of the things I've written. So thank you for bringing that up and acknowledging that. But I think for me, like throughout the process of writing this, I've like had to like shift my mind like so many times to be able to write in this way and not like follow the outlines that were like given to me by my department or something like that. So one of the things that like I hope to be able to do is, I don't know if it like starts with the students or if it starts with like the institution, maybe with the institution, but something along the lines of being able to show like how we can approach things differently and still meet the same goal. So for example, like I've written this thing and this thesis, and it doesn't match completely what the department has given me, but I'm still like reaching this goal. And I think a lot of our students, if they were able to engage in their curriculum in ways that were, you know, more appropriate for the way they understand things, they would be able to reach goals. I mean, either way, they're able to reach the goals they want to, but a bit more easily and a bit more intentionally, and giving back to their communities maybe in some way as well. So again, like, I don't know if those conversations happen like with the students first and with like showing them critical theories and stuff like that, or like participatory action research models, or if it, I mean, I guess it needs to happen on both sides, right? So that's kind of where this whole process has like pushed me, and as well as like graduate students too, but that's a whole nother story. So yeah, that's my first initial reaction to your answer, but there are a lot of layers to that answer for me as well.
Reading this work was just a joy, and being on this committee has been so rewarding for me. I've learned so much from you, and I'm taking notes, and usually I have a few questions, and I wrote Psych Shannyn. There's something that I'm working on right now. I mean, what all the things Dr. Olson has said about your methodology, and just to acknowledge, I mean, first, just amazing kind of presentation, right? The photos, starting with the pictures of your family, showing the students, the student org, the really powerful drawings, the classroom drawings that they did, it just brought life to the presentation that I just really enjoyed. So great job on that. And just kind of the presentation. I feel like what I read really was represented here in a way that was really I wanted to acknowledge just your labor in putting this together, because I don't know if folks know, but we do not train students in critical qualitative methodologies and really critical methodologies at all. And I think, you know, for students to do this type of work means that they almost train themselves with the support of their committees. And I just want to acknowledge that labor that goes into that, because you're doing all of the work and then you're doing the extra work to do the type of work that you want to do. And it's really easy just to say, I'm just going to do it this way because that's what they tell us. But to spend the time and the energy to do it the way that you felt would be the best way to represent, you know, just so well done. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I hope we'll start doing that for students, for folks who want to do that.
I was gonna say, when you said that, I started laughing because after my proposal, Dr. Ambo's like, you need to read this book and this book. I'm like, I gotta read two books.
You said that at like chapter 9, you called it
Right.
like she writes about how it's like no one trains Indigenous scholars on how to do this work. It's a lot of it is self-taught and community taught.
You did a beautiful job. I really only had kind of questions that I want to know more about. And that could take a lot of time because there's so many, there's so much more I kind of want to know. But maybe I'll just ask too, because the Talanoa groups just seemed like really powerful spaces. And I was wondering if they shared, you know, we read what they said and there was some really insightful kind of stories. I love, again, the storytelling piece of it. Did they talk about what that was like that experience of participating in the Talanoa? Did they talk about that at all?
During the sessions, I don't think so. I don't think they did. I'm lucky to be already like accepted within this group, so I don't think they need to do too much like in the moment processing of me being with them. So for example, the first session was in the general body meeting, the general body student meeting. And we did the discussion, we did the activity, and then they just like moved all of the chairs and tables in the classroom and started like doing the dance practice. So it was never, I'm grateful because research usually doesn't happen like this, I feel, that they just like went about their business and like allowed me to sit with them and be with them in their space, you know, versus me asking them to come in like a more clinical setting and like saying, okay, here's what we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but rather it was really organic. So I don't remember, but I will say there's a lot on the recordings that I don't write because it's like them like reciting TikToks or like, you know, like saying things like when one student would say something, they would like affirm each other in their slang, like her or like yes or something like slay, like things like that. So it's pretty funny to listen to, and that's what I was talking about when I was saying that it was funny. But so no, but I think in another way, at least I interpret it again as like or more organically capturing what they had to say and how they felt in that moment. And then in the second telenovela session with 10 participants, it was again a bit more intimate. I brought a little like hot plate and we were like making tacos. Like we had like, I know it was prepped meat and then we just like warmed up the tortillas and we're like, so it almost felt like we were like at Korean barbecue or something because it was like cooking and we were talking at the same time. So in a way, I don't feel that the students even felt that I was doing research. We were just talking, you know what I mean? When I had specific things that I wanted to talk about.
I asked that question because I think one of my takeaways is this part around like the cultural affirmation, and that was like a huge thread throughout the study. And they talked about how important these centers are for them, right? Like how important our Office of Multicultural Affairs and like the work that Darnell does and Alondra does in kind of directing and providing support for our students, because oftentimes that is the only space where they find that. And that being in that space and engaging in that way leads to well-being and it leads to healing from, right, the university as a separate colonial state, right? We talked about dispossession and all the things like that's what they were saying. That's what I heard. And so I'm wondering if that came up at all at any point from students to talk about that.
You know, it's interesting for our center because we have the smallest center out of all of them. So actually most of the time when we bring up the center, it's again about basic needs because it's something they're going in to grab things. If there's space, they will gather in community there. They do, but most of the time it's something they use for basic needs. But I think, again, I'm gonna just go back to the first example of them like literally pushing all the desks and making it their space wherever they go. So for the specific student population, for the group that I was with, the healing really comes to where's everybody at? If it's in this room, if it's in another room, if it's out in the quad, that's where I think it takes place. And that's why it's important to make opportunities for them to gather and not just ones that they establish for themselves. You know, they're the ones who establish the general body meetings. And if they're gonna go hang out, they're the ones putting it together versus like us as an institution.
So that classroom thing now, I mean, I just read my spots and I was in a classroom in this building with those desks. And that those desks, those individual desks, it's like we could all walk right upstairs. I think it's AS230. Anybody in this room can please go help me. Let's each carry a desk out and throw it on to 7th Street. Because I think also like in citing Shannyn, what your research is doing is it's also grounding like empirical evidence too. You have spots, you cite Shannyn and beg that we never have those in a space. So I think too, I wondered about, besides her sphere of influence, like when you're finding all of these things, how do you think this could be addressed at various levels within the CSU, right? We're so lucky that we have this large system and we get to really work with so many students in this state, you know, and I think my spots, for example, aren't broken down by any kind of identities or whatever, but for students, it's always been the standout in that space of how much they don't fit in that space. Their tech, their food, you know, they're graduate students, so they're here at night, things are sliding down. They can't be in community with each other. And community is really a big part of learning. So I think it really, the evidence that you're giving all of us, but I would encourage you to really embrace like, hey, not only just this campus, but go around and see how many of your learning spaces actually, I don't know of a student yet that's been like, I just love that tiny desk. I just love it. I really feel like a learner there, you know? So it's like, well, how much would that cost? You know, what does that look like? Are there ways that we can go and like just change these learning spaces? You have so many drawings in your thesis too, you know, and some of it will be harder for some faculty to conceptualize, like, because we don't know when we're in a space and who's in there after us, you know, but something like that can be beneficial. And it doesn't always have to be a smart classroom. I think we think about investments with technology, and it's literally like just a table, you know, and so that's something significant. This is small, but it's a note that I would have too, because I encourage you to really, I want you to think about also a question that I had is like, what you would do with this in terms of even the findings at long. Because you took this risk, right? And everybody here that got to come. But, you know, are there ways that you can engage people that aren't here today in professional development? And what does that look like at like a faculty level? So that faculty are interested in come and say, how do I do this better? And you have some really concrete examples that I think help people think of like, I could do that when I walk out. You know, how you might engage like other student affairs professionals and things they could do. How might you engage some of the administrators? Some are here today, but like what can they do? They can walk out and figure out something they could do. I want you also, hopefully you'll publish. I'll be willing to help you. I think that this should be out there beyond the library. I want you to really push your abstract harder. Your methodological approach. It's so 3 scholars are at the table and it's really important to us. So you know, putting that out there because that's the ticket of like if someone keeps going with this or not. I also think, you know, pushing how that central theme connects with the other themes is really important. You're really building on belonging. So identity, like social identity, students' whole cultural identities are such a big part of belonging, as like Strayhorn and others have written. But I think you're really adding something in there. And then also like pushing some of those concrete recommendations that you have, because you have them. Sometimes, normally my questions for students are like, okay, so who should do what? And you're really clear in the document of like, this is what practitioners can be doing. So I would push that a little bit more too.
You might want to consider a brief for the templates, or even like just kind of even for your office, like creating a report or like a brief memo or a brief piece of data from your study. So I kind of say like these are the key points and these are like the key recommendations. I also think the work can really help you develop a strategic plan. On like, you know, 10 years, this is what we want to happen in the CSU, or maybe 20 years in the CSUs. Like it's hard to transform and change just systems, right? And we take our wins where we can get them, and sometimes it feels like for every step forward, something might happen, and we take like 3 steps back. But I think of like our relatives in New Zealand, and like, you know, they put forward this plan, like 100 PhDs by this day, right? And they achieved it. And it was maybe like a moonshot, sort of like unattainable goal, but it was accomplished. And then like now their goal is like a Maori person in every like sector of government, every university, and they're working towards that. So I think, like, you know, thinking about UCs, CSUs, and like, you know, what is your moonshot, you know, for Pacific Islander students? Yeah, because this is like one of the most like underrepresented communities, and a lot of our institutions like profess the interests of like serving the most underrepresented, but then the like resources demonstrate priorities, right? And yes, there's strikes and there's shifts in budgets and there's budget cuts, but one of my arguments is like, well, 2 of my arguments. One is like the smallest community like should be given the most resources because the lift is like it's much greater, right? We have to do so much more to like increase the population, improve retention, and improve graduation, right? But then another argument that I have is like, well, our population is small, we don't require that much money, like so like pull me up. So I'd encourage you to think about like a report, and kind of thinking like very, very specifically on like what would that look like, and like who could you partner with. At UC San Diego, as an example, we had a class that we taught last spring, colonialism, campuses, and Korean nation. And we let staff audit the course. It was an undergraduate course, but it was information the staff had never heard about the tribal community. They asked, we required them to do all the assignments, and then so their assignment was they chose to develop a training for their center. And this year they implemented a quarterly training on teaching about local Korean people, bringing Korean people to talk about the campus and the land. And so it was like a unintended benefit of the class and their participation, but it made me think like, well, we have to also partner with other faculty, other centers, other staff to actually do these structural things, so that we also don't have to carry the weight of the responsibility.
It's not a question, but I'm wondering, and this would be like future work, right? I feel like your work really transcends this kind of work, right? Because for me, when I read the stories of the students, they recognize that they don't need to seek belonging from an institution. That they find that in other spaces that they create themselves. And so what does higher ed look like if we don't seek that anymore? If we change the relationship with the institution? Because we know that they were never created for us, and any attempt to gain any recognition is going to be process of appropriation, all of that. So what, I don't know, and this isn't going to be helpful for like practitioners, right? Because it's like we're talking about like what are the everyday strategies that we need to do, but also thinking about the beyond a little bit, and thinking about how do these students talk about and allow you to see maybe what this, I don't know if it remains a system or not, like what can this be? Like what can this education past, right, our public school education. Because when I see these spaces and them create these spaces, I think about that they're creating something, right? That we don't, at least in higher ed, really get.
I think like as I was finishing up my writing, I was kind of thinking of that. I'm like, well, I already wrote this whole thing like interrogating the institution, but at the same time, like our students are finding ways to grow without the institution. And I don't know, I think I'm still like thinking about, or like you said, it's something that is kind of beyond this research, but how do we still support while also not like, messing things up, going in there and trying to like, put things in place on the students' behalf when they're clearly able to do things on their own. Definitely keep that in my mind. Thank you.
Okay, Love Paperson wrote Their University is Possible, and it talks about like how like within this institution there exists another university, and it's like that subversive sort of place where many of us live and work together, and we like coexist at the same time. Okay? But their university doesn't require diversity to like sustain itself. For the yeah, right. Yeah.
Space.
Yeah.
But again, this is like future future work.
We have time maybe for a question or two from the audience. If anyone has a burning question for Shannyn that might determine the outcome. Don't ask her anything too hard. Any questions?
Question in the chat.
Yeah,
Let's read it. It's from Posse. And she says, based off of your research, how impactful would allied training be for faculty, staff, and administrators with helping and learning these re-indigenizing practices, such as all your excellent implication examples? And then she put in parentheses for when they give us some links.
So
how impactful? I mean, I think it would be very impactful. And the professional development that I highlight is not only on like cultural practices, but relationship, because we're not even going to open up about culture if like that relationship isn't there yet. So yeah, I think that's like if we were creating together, Cassie, like a training or ally training, I think it would have to, of course, center relationships and how to connect and how to recognize more seamlessly throughout the things that we do. And then also talking about like the nuances of culture, bringing those into the classroom and stuff like that.
One more thing, the relationship thing stood out so much, and it's just so important. And the way we're all socialized to be learners in the US doesn't value relationships. And it's interesting with grad students, sometimes when I sit and say, how are you doing? And I want to know like how you're doing, not how the thesis is doing, right? Sure, human first. And sometimes I watch even students, they're like, oh, I got a little sick, but I'm still doing my work. And I'm like, no, how are you doing? And then like, let's talk about you being sick, I don't know that students always, and again, I'm with grad students, so they've gone through like a lot of systems by the time. But I get it, because I think when I was a grad student, when I had a professor do that, I thought, and like, you really are talking to me as like a person and not just, like a productive being. So it's much more challenging than people think, because even students are like, what are you doing? Like, you're talking to me like a human, and the relationships are just so important in building trust, I think, with students. So I thank you for that too. I think you did that well and can teach people how to do that. Yeah.
So first of all, Shannyn, thank you so much for the research that you did, and really giving us, I think like so much hope, for what the future will be here. I have a lot of notes, but I'm gonna try to be a little bit more concise with it. I will also divulge and be colonial in my own positionality that I also went to a CSU, and I worked at a CSU. And so, Shannyn, your research is it's so important because at the CSU, it is the largest system in California, which sets the standard also throughout the nation. And because I used to work with the CSUs, I actually used to work with the chancellor's office. So when you talk about some of the statistics, I do remember that coming up when I'd asked about the statistics of the largest population, which is Long Beach. So to give you all a bird's eye view, I think it's so important to think about the research that you're doing here, because it's a continuum, right? I can give you a piece of that story because that is the truth. I would ask the same thing, like that's actually the largest population of the CSUs right there in HBI. And it's like, well, it's still statistically insignificant. And it's used the data. So I say that because I think the research that you're doing is so cutting edge and really important to the conversation of our sense of belonging here at CSUs. And I think the only thing that I ask, if I'm asking you, essentially, because I haven't read this or like read the thesis yet, but I think being able to include just our backstory as NHGS here in Long Beach, because the students, I love the stories that you're including. Part of the stories that I feel like can potentially help support is that we have a long history here in Long Beach. And I think that the thesis being situated with that context, contextualize how much that comment with the students that this is Long Beach. That's what I'm reading into it as someone that's also PI and recognizing that Long Beach, it's a huge population here. And I think that this is the backyard of what I would say some of our largest numbers of any guys out here in Southern California. So I think that conceptualization of who we are at this institution and then the way that it plays out. Your comment, I do appreciate, and I feel that this is Dr. Ambo as well, the subversive space to not feel like we need that recognition. I think it's also very important because I do believe when you build it, it will come. And so I guess as part of your recommendation, also being mindful to ask what can we do without the money, even though we need the money. But in the interim, what can we do? Because I do question, when do we create change? Is it always having to be dependent on money? Even though we recognize that that's very important. But if we're going for the money, I often feel like our communities stand to lose. I feel like our numbers, we're to tell a different story. I don't want to tell the deficit part of that story, but I do think there's some value in thinking about what the faculty said, how the students experience that. Whatever negative experiences they were feeling are also very valid. And I don't know, I would still like to hear that as well. Yeah. I think it's so important to also talk about that and recognize that their experiences that they have, if that's a longitudinal study, like I'm asking the question of like, then the numbers make sense or we're not here. So yes, Shannyn, props, follow people, appreciate you.
Real quick, and then we'll be back.
Make the decision. Any other questions?
I just want to piggyback because that's like super powerful. I want to say also congratulations. I want to say that in and of itself, your work is a love-soaked act of resistance. You did a lot of disrupting, interrogating. If the students' words amplified that message of the institution wanting to indigenize, but still not really being done with Indigenous people. So after you disrupt, I know you have plans later today, but make sure you engage in healing and restoration for yourself because there is obligation that comes with the research and the work. And then lastly, I want to say, I hope you present, if not at a coffee this year, I hope you're thinking about it because it's phenomenal work. And you did a super thorough job. The only thing I was going to add to the comment that was just made is, you know, I think you mentioned this along the historical context and having those, making sure we're not telling a historical conversation specific to Long Beach, which I love, but also considering like place-based knowledge systems, right? That for Indigenous people, it's not just about geographic place, and thinking about everything that your phenomenal committee already mentioned, but that idea of always finding that ocean within the school, no matter where we are. So there's a lot of things I know theoretically you're thinking about, but thinking about, you know, that it's not always about where we stand, right? So where we come from. But great job. Great job.
Fantastic job. I'm so glad that I didn't watch it. Because I really don't like the drive here. But fantastic job. I think it's really, you know, I when I did my dissertation, I similarized that methodologies that were true to my community. Really, like it's really nice to see someone else do it. Because it shows how it kind of connects to what everyone's saying, but we're breaking down systems within it. We're saying, I'm gonna change who I am. I'm gonna do this work in a way that meets those checkboxes, that I'm gonna do it in a way that honors who I am, who I come from. Having done it like a year and a half ago, I know it's not easy, which is probably why I was a little shocked. You probably cried right this. The other thing I wanted to say was two things. One, I'm on the Curriculum Education Policies Council, and if there's a way that I'm new, I'm barely in my week too, but if there's a way that we can get you to come present this to that council, let's figure it out, because I think that it's something that that needs to be heard, particularly because there's something this week where I put this emphasis on how there needs to be, and of course, talking about data sovereign or data collection, use of that data, there needs to be, we're slowly devoted to ethical use of it, and it still got passed and voted through without any consideration for the harm that data does to people of color. So I think something like your research will show that we need to be more intentional about how we make decisions. The other thing is just thinking about the historical background.
think about Long Beach and people talk about Pomona, they think about that field on the north side of campus and don't recognize that all of this is Pomona. So when they're starting to unpack this idea of like why is like one of the largest PI communities, why is it Long Beach? And it has something to do with Pomona being part like a place of creation, a place of, it's always ironic that the place where Tonga people our education or our first teachings come from now houses a school, a university. So there's something there that's going to make a connection to why this is the place that has a really high population, why this is a university and PI students are drawn to, and it's something about that connection to the land. And also I always say, like, I live from the center, like I'm Tongan, like I feel most connected to like with other indigenous peoples, of course, like Southern California, but if I think outside of California, I feel more connected to PIs than I do to someone from inland in the US, and it's because Tongan people, we're island people too, and it's kind of like we're a bridge, we're one of the stops to get to the mainland. And I think that there's all this to say, I think there's a cultural connection there, there's a deeply spiritual connection that is gonna but that's the disconnection. It's but fantastic job. I am so thankful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna have to write a whole nother chapter with all these comments. It's so good. I really appreciate the comments, but also just the energy of the room and everybody who's in here. Thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate you for driving all this way to come and see me and to hear about what I've been doing for the past year. But something that I do write about is how the ways that I think about things is not just through those like frameworks that I showed you on the screen, but it's like truly through like all the relationships that I've developed and the people that I've learned from. So thank you.
We appreciate you, sir.
Well, there's conchas back there. Please have some fruit. I don't know what to Hey, buddy. Hi, friend.
Shannyn, I just want to thank you so much. We need this type of work, and I know that it's not easy, but we need this type of research to justify those secret spaces that we need for population.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And I was texting Jason because I do want to build that connection between Romana to that pathway. So thank you.
Well, we're back. And Shannyn has successfully passed.
Woo!
Job. We all really enjoyed it. And as scholars too, it's amazing when we work with our students and we learn a lot from them. And I think we've all learned so much from you. And so we're really proud of you and hope that you pursue your PhD. Portion of Shannyn's defense.
I mean, you heard the conversations we had at this table, and just imagine all the things that have been helping me think through for this past year. So I really appreciate content the way it did, like as the full document, if it wasn't for each of you and all of the different things that you bring into the conversation. So thank you.
Shout out to Florencia, who also recently passed, but so I hope you all celebrate Shannyn today. Yeah,
She told me all the way in March how to walk 15 minutes.
As a team, in our group.
They look at it, pull up to the cookie.
Let the smoke burn for a day.
Oh, look at that.
Wait.
My Android has the best photos.
All right.
Oh, look at all those big smiles. Her.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
It's been a while.
I had to show up.
So I had a list of that was like my third year or something, yeah. And then my son's I was very pregnant, which was like after announcement. And I had this like right out. So I can't eat. And she was I know.
I know, I mean, just really rich one.
And then I was like, right. Oh, yeah.